The salty tang of the ocean hangs heavy in the air as the ship rests in the harbor, its sails furled, waiting for the journey ahead. The docks are alive with the shouts of merchants, the creak of ropes, and the rhythmic lapping of waves against weathered wood. The vessel, whether a merchant brig, a whaling ship, or a naval frigate, has a reputation for reliability, its hull sturdy, its crew experienced. The captain, a grizzled seaman with years of voyages behind him, stands on the quarterdeck, surveying the final preparations with a steady gaze. There is nothing unusual about this departure, just another routine passage across the sea. Yet, beneath the ordinary bustle, something feels off. A sailor, old and superstitious, mutters under his breath as he ties off a line. He had seen the Raven land on the bow at dawn, a bad omen, a messenger of death. Another crewman hesitates before stepping aboard, his fingers brushing a charm hidden beneath his shirt. The night before, he had dreamed of dark water swallowing him whole, of hands pulling him under. He shakes the thought away. Superstition has no place on a rational man's voyage. The captain's logbook is crisp and precise, the entries neat and professional. Weather fair, winds favorable, all hands accounted for. But as the last crate is loaded, a mirror, perhaps belonging to the first mate's vanity, slips from careless hands and shatters on the dock. The crew pauses, an uneasy silence settling over them. Some exchange glances, others force a laugh, brushing it off. Yet the tension lingers, unspoken. The ship casts off, the ropes loosening, the sails catching the wind. The shore grows smaller, the cheers of well-wishers fading into the distance. The crew falls into their routines, but an unshakable sense of unease follows them into the open sea. The weather holds, the waves are calm, but the men glance over their shoulders more often than they should. And as the sun dips below the horizon, staining the sky blood red, the ship presses onward, into the vast, uncaring ocean, and toward whatever fate awaits. The morning mist clung to the harbor like a shroud as the Valencia prepared to set sail. A three-masted merchant brig, she was a fine vessel. Her oak hull weathered but strong, her sails patched from past storms but still proud. Captain Elias Hargrove stood on the quarterdeck, his pipe smoke curling into the damp air as he watched the last of the cargo being loaded. Barrels of rum, crates of spices, and a strange iron-bound chest marked with foreign sigils. The ship was heavy with goods, and heavier still with the unspoken tension that had settled over the crew. The men worked in near silence, their usual sea shanties absent. Even the gulls seemed quieter than usual, their cries muffled by the thick air. Old Tom, the ship's cook, crossed himself as he stepped aboard, his lips moving in a silent prayer. He had sailed for 40 years, and he knew the signs, the way the water had rippled against the dock that morning, not with the tide, but as if something vast had passed beneath. The way the ship's cat, a grizzled tabby named Jonah, had refused to come aboard, hissing and spitting before vanishing into the alleys of the port. First, Mate William Graves scoffed at the old man's mutterings. "Superstitious fools," he muttered, tightening the strap of his sea chest. But even he paused when the ship's bell, untouched, gave a single, mournful toll. The sound hung in the air, and for a breath, the harbor fell silent. Then, as if nothing had happened, the noise of the docks returned, the shouts of stevedores, the creak of rigging, the slap of fish against the market stalls. The captain's daughter, a girl of no more than 16 with wide, dark eyes, stood at the rail, her fingers gripping the wood until her knuckles whitened. She had begged her father not to take this voyage, had wept the night before, though she could not say why. Now she watched as the last line was cast off, as the gap between ship and shore grew wider. A single tear traced her cheek, though the day was not cold. And then, just as the Valencia cleared the harbor mouth, the wind shifted. It came from the east, unnatural, the sailors whispered, for this time of year, and carried with it the faintest scent of brine and something else, something old and rotten, like a long-submerged wreck brought suddenly to the surface. The sails snapped full, and the ship surged forward, as if eager to be away. Behind them, the sun broke through the clouds, casting the port in golden light. But ahead, the horizon was dark, the sea a shifting black. The crew exchanged glances but said nothing. They were sailors, after all, and the sea was their home. Yet as the land faded behind them, not one man looked back. The Valencia had been at sea for 17 days when the first unnatural thing occurred. It began with the stillness. The wind, which had carried them steadily since departure, died without warning. The sails sagged like the wings of a dead bird, and the ship drifted listlessly under a sky the color of tarnished silver. The crew muttered among themselves, their voices low, as if afraid the sea itself might hear them. The ocean stretched flat and endless in every direction, its surface smooth as polished obsidian, unnaturally so. No swell, no ripple, no sign of life beneath its glassy skin. That was when the knocking started. At first, it was faint. 3 slow, deliberate strikes against the hull, as if something massive were testing the wood. The sound echoed through the ship, sending a hush through the men on deck. The captain ordered the crew to inspect the exterior, but the sea remained undisturbed, its black surface unbroken. The knock-in came again, louder this time, and from multiple points along the keel. A rhythm almost like code. Then the fog rolled in. It came not from the horizon, but from beneath the ship, rising in thick, sinuous tendrils that coiled around the masts and spilled across the deck like spectral fingers. The temperature plummeted. The men's breath fogged in the sudden cold, and the oil lamps flickered, their flames burning an eerie, unnatural blue. From somewhere in the mist, a voice called out, a woman's voice, sweet and clear, singing a shanty none of them recognized. The words were just beyond comprehension, the melody both mournful and mocking. Some of the crew covered their ears, others staggered toward the railing, their eyes wide and vacant, as if entranced. First Mate Graves barked orders, his voice sharp with fear. "Eyes forward! No one looks overboard!" But it was too late for young Peters, the cabin boy. With a cry, he lurched toward the rail, his hands outstretched toward the fog. Graves caught him by the collar, yanking him back just as something pale and long-fingered broke the surface of the water below, grasping at empty air before vanishing beneath the waves. The captain's log from that night survives, its final entry written in a shaky hand. No stars, no wind, the sea is wrong. They are singing to us from the deep. God help any who answer. By dawn, the fog had lifted. The wind returned, and the knocking had stopped. But the crew would later swear that the ship sat lower in the water than before, as if something heavy had climbed aboard in the night. The HMS Corinthian had been tracking the derelict for hours before they finally closed the distance. The ship, what remained of the Valencia, drifted like a corpse in the water, her sails hanging in tattered ribbons from the yards, her hull groaning with every sluggish roll of the waves. Even from a distance, something about her was wrong. The way she listed to starboard, not from damage, but as if something unseen weighed her down. The way her figurehead, once a proud maiden, now seemed to scream silently into the wind, her wooden face twisted in agony. Captain Lowry of the Corinthian ordered a boarding party. The men crossed the gap between ships in silence, their boots echoing too loudly against the damp wood as they stepped onto the Valencia's deck. The air was thick with the scent of salt and something fouler, like wet rot, like meat left too long in the sun. A half-eaten meal still sat on the mess table, the stew in the bowls, long since congealed into a grayish film. A game of cards lay scattered across a crate, as if the players had simply vanished mid-hand. In the captain's quarters, the logbook lay open, the final entry smeared with what looked like seawater or tears. The words were barely legible. The boarding party found the crew's belongings neatly stowed, hammocks still swaying gently with the ship's movement. No signs of struggle, no blood, no lifeboats missing. Only one thing was out of place. Every mirror on board, from the small hand glass in the first mate's quarters to the polished brass in the galley, had been shattered. Not broken in panic, but covered, as if someone had taken great care to ensure no reflection could ever be seen in them again. Then, from deep within the ship, a sound. A single drawn-out scratch, like nails dragging across wood. The men froze. One of them, a young ensign named Doyle, swore under his breath and raised his lantern toward the hold. The light flickered over the stairs leading below decks, where the darkness was thicker, heavier, as if resisting the flame. That was when the knocking started again, not from the hull this time, from inside. Captain Lowry called for a retreat. The boarding party needed no convincing. They fled back to the Corinthian, their voices tight with panic, their eyes wild. As they rowed away, the last man to leave the Valencia would swear he saw something move in the shadows of the quarterdeck. A shape too tall, too thin, its fingers curling over the rail like sea-polished bone. By the time the Corinthian turned to make for port, the fog had already swallowed the Valencia whole, and the knocking followed them all the way home. The Corinthian limped into port under a sky heavy with unshed rain, her crew hollow-eyed and whispering. Word spread through the dockside taverns before the ship's lines were even secured. They'd found the Valencia, and whatever they'd seen aboard her had left them broken. That night, in the smoke-choked back room of the Salty Dog, the men of the Corinthian sat hunched over their ale like conspirators, their voices barely rising above the crackle of the hearth. Around them, the tavern's patrons leaned in, their faces half lit by the flickering firelight, their breath stilled as the tale unfolded. Captain Lowry spoke first, his voice raw. "She was a grave," he said, "not a ship. A grave that hadn't finished burying its dead." Then the theories began. Old Finn, a whaler with a face like sun-bleached driftwood, swore it was the drowners, souls of men lost at sea, who pull the living down to fill the empty spaces in the deep. He'd heard their songs before, he said, on still nights in the doldrums. A red-eyed university man, drunk on rum and grief, his brother had been the Corinthians' ensign, produced a water-stained monograph on the Mary Celeste and other ghost ships. "It's the sea's madness," he slurred, "a waking plague that makes men see horrors and leap from the decks to escape them." Father Marin, who'd come to bless the Corinthians' return, made the sign of the cross. "Some ships make God turn his face away," he murmured. He spoke of the Flying Dutchman, of vessels cursed for carrying blasphemous cargo, slaves or stolen relics, or worse. Only one man from the boarding party would speak plainly, Doyle, the young ensign, whose hands hadn't stopped shaking since the return. "It wasn't empty," he whispered. "Something was in the hold, something that learned how to knock." Then, from the shadowed corner, a new voice rasped, "You brought it back." The room fell silent. The speaker was a one-legged dockhand, his skin pocked with old burns. 30 years ago, he claimed, he'd served on a ship that found the Valencia's sister vessel, the Siren's Call, adrift under the same conditions. "We towed her," he said. "By morning, half my crew was gone. The rest changed, started speaking in tongues, started knocking on bulkheads in their sleep." He lifted his peg leg with a grimace. "Cut it off myself when the rot set in. Only way to stop it spreading." As the fire burned low, the stories multiplied. Tales of ships found with their crews petrified at their posts, of lifeboats rowed by skeletons, of radio transmissions from vanished vessels pleading for help decades after their sinking. But the most chilling account came last. A child, a dockmaster's daughter, tugged at Doyle's sleeve. "The lady in the mist told me," she lisped. "She says the Valencia is lonely. She says it wants more singers for its choir." When asked what the lady looked like, the girl simply pointed to the Corinthian's hull, where 3 long wet streaks gleamed in the lamplight, as if something had tried to claw its way aboard. The Valencia was spotted one last time on the eve of the winter solstice, her silhouette cutting through the fog like a blade through smoke. The SS Peregrine, a steamer bound for Lisbon, nearly rammed her in the dead of night, her running lights dark, her decks slick with black brine. Captain Vasquez ordered full reverse, the ship's engines screaming in protest as they veered away at the last possible moment. Through the swirling mist, the crew saw the impossible. The Valencia was alive. Not with crew, not with men, but with movement. Shadows slithered along her decks, too tall and too thin to be human. The rigging twisted like spider silk in an unseen wind. And from her open hatches, a sound poured forth. Not the knocking this time, but a chorus. Dozens of voices, singing that same shanty the Corinthians' men had heard, their harmonies warped, their words just out of reach. Then the Valencia did what no ship could do without wind or current. She turned. Her bow swung toward the Peregrine, her shattered figurehead locking eyes with the terrified crew. The singing grew louder, the deck trembling underfoot as if something beneath the waves was pushing her forward. Captain Vasquez, a man who'd survived 2 wars at sea, did the only thing he could think to do. He ordered the distress flares fired. The crimson light exploded over the water, painting the Valencia in blood-red hues. For one horrific instant, her true form was revealed. Her hull was infested. Barnacles crusted her sides in unnatural patterns, faces, screaming mouths, outstretched hands. Her sails weren't torn. They'd been chewed, the edges frayed like flesh after teeth. And in her crow's nest, something crouched, its 2 long limbs wrapped around the mast, its head cocked at an impossible angle. Then the flare died, and the Valencia was gone. Not sunk, not vanished into the fog, gone, as if she'd never been there at all. The Peregrine's radio crackled to life that night, broadcasting static for hours before a single clear transmission broke through. "They're singing in the hold!" A voice the Corinthian survivors recognized as Ensign Doyle's. Then laughter, wet, gurgling, hungry. The next morning, the Peregrine's crew found 3 inches of black water in their bilge, water that stank of salt and rotting wood, no matter how many times they pumped it out. And deep in the ship's hold, if you pressed your ear to the hull at midnight, you could just make it out. Knock, knock, knock. The winter storms came early that year, howling across the Atlantic like vengeful spirits. It was on the longest night of the year, when the line between worlds grows thin, that the whaler Esmeralda stumbled upon the Valencia for what would be the last recorded sighting. Captain Johansen had known something was wrong the moment the lookout's cry rang out. The voice didn't sound human, too high, too shrill, like a seabird mimicking speech. When he reached the deck, the cold stole his breath. The sea was glassy calm under a moon that burned too bright, casting everything in sickly silver. And there, not 100 yards off the starboard bow, the Valencia floated in impossible silence. Her masts stood bare, the sails long since rotted away, yet she moved against the current. The wood of her hull had turned black, not from char but from something worse, a slick, living darkness that pulsed in the moonlight. What remained of her figurehead had changed. The screaming maiden's mouth now stretched in a rictus grin, her wooden eyes weeping black sap. The crew of the Esmeralda watched in horror as tendrils of fog began coiling up from the Valencia's hatches. Not normal fog, this moved with purpose, snaking across the water toward their ship. The temperature plummeted. The ship's cat arched its back and hissed, its fur standing on end before it fled below decks. Then the singing began. Not from the Valencia this time, but from the water itself. 100 voices rose in discordant harmony, singing a hymn no living throat could produce. The sound vibrated in the bones of the watching sailors, making teeth ache and ears bleed. Some men clamped hands over their ears, others simply stood transfixed, their eyes glazing over as the melody worked its way into their minds. First, Mate Graves, yes, the same man who'd served aboard the Corinthian, was the first to see them. Shapes moving in the fog aboard the Valencia. Not shadows, not exactly. They had too many joints in their limbs, their movements too fluid. They clustered at the railings, their elongated fingers curling over the sides. One turned its head, too far, too fast, and Graves saw its face, smooth as porcelain, featureless save for a mouth that split the white surface from ear to ear. The radio in the Esmeralda's bridge crackled to life unbidden. Through the static came a voice that hadn't spoken in years, Captain Hargrove of the Valencia, his words distorted as if spoken through water. The transmission cut off as the Valencia gave a great shudder. Her hull began to crack open like a rotten egg, black ichor pouring from the seams. But what emerged wasn't water. It moved. It breathed. Great tendrils of something neither plant nor animal slithered forth, wrapping around the dying ship, pulling her down. The sea wasn't deep here. Yet the Valencia sank as if into an endless abyss, her masts tilting at impossible angles. The singing reached a crescendo as the last of her disappeared beneath the waves. Then silence. The crew of the Esmeralda stood frozen for a full minute before the screaming started. Young cabin boy Phillips was first, clawing at his face as black veins spread beneath his skin. Then others joined, men tearing at their clothes, their skin, as if trying to escape something inside them. Captain Johansson watched in horror as Graves calmly walked to the railing, turned to face him with those blank, shining eyes and said, "She's in the water now, in all water. Can't you hear her singing in your blood?" Then he dove overboard. They never found the body. The Esmeralda made port 3 weeks later, with half her crew missing and the other half changed. They refused to speak of what happened, only asking to be let off at the nearest port. The ship's log contained one final chilling entry in Johansson's shaky hand. The Valencia was never the ship. The ship was just the first thing she wore. Now she's putting on a new skin. The ocean itself. And if you walk the docks at certain ports today, the old sailors will warn you, don't listen too closely to the waves at night. That's not the wind you hear moaning through the rigging. That's not the normal creak of wood and rope. And if you ever see a patch of water too still, too black, with a sheen like rotting wood, don't look at it. Don't speak to it. Most of all, Don't answer when it starts knocking. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.